Father, I just come to you in the name of your Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, and I just thank you so much for your mercy and your love to us. I thank you for the opportunity to be able to witness for you today. You said in your word, they slew them by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And so I just pray now that you'd give me the words to speak, that your Spirit would come and rest upon me, and that the words that I speak would be words of life to those that hear and those that would watch this video. In the name of your Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, I pray these things. Amen. So, very nice to meet you all. I've been to I've never been to Norway, so I have been over to Europe. I guess in the Netherlands and Germany, and so I've appreciated my time visiting there. I start from the beginning. So I was born back in 1969, and I was born at a time, I don't know, I don't like to talk about popular culture, but there was a movie that came out years ago with an American actor called Jack Nicholson, and it was a movie called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And in that movie, it's about a man who ended up in an insane asylum, and because he was belligerent, they gave him electric shock therapy. Something like that, very similar, happened to my biological mother. Shortly after I was born, she went into postpartum depression, and at that time, when people would try to commit suicide, they would commit them to mental institutions, and they would experiment on them with electric shock therapy. So that's what they did to my mother. And when my mother came back out 6 months later, she was a paranoid schizophrenic, and she was that way the rest of her life. So the first 6 months of my life, my aunt, who was my mother's brother, she was my primary caregiver, and then my dad and my biological mother got back together at that time, but their marriage didn't last. Only lasted till about the age of 3 years old, when my grandfather came and took my mother back with him, and my parents ultimately, they divorced. My dad then, from that experience and other things, ended up giving his life to the Lord. He was in a hotel room and came across a Gideon Testament. I don't know if you've ever, some of this culture you may or may not know, but the Gideons is a Christian men's organization in the United States, and they put Bibles out, and primarily they put Bibles in hospitals and in hotel rooms. So anyway, he read this Gideon Testament, and he decided to make a commitment of his life to Jesus Christ, and he had a conversion experience. I really believe that my father's early experience was a true conversion experience. And so when he finally did get custody of me at the age of 6, which probably was for my benefit because my biological mother really was not able to raise me. My grandparents helped her, but I don't want to get into every single detail of my upbringing. Just suffice it to say that it was difficult because when my dad would have custody of me, he would talk to me about, do you want to live with me? And when my grandparents and my mother would have me, then they would talk to me about, do I want to live with them? And so there was always this torn feeling that I had as a child, not wanting to displease either side, my father or my mother. So I learned early on that I had to lie about where I wanted to be. I really wanted to be with my father, but I told my grandparents one time that I wanted to live with my dad, and that produced quite the spanking because that was upsetting to them. I didn't know any better, so it was just, I guess, everybody has I think a disjointed childhood. Some are worse than others, but for me, psychologically, that put me in a place early on as an adult that I just felt, and have many times felt, kind of disconnected from the world, disconnected from reality, and because I never really had a biological mother. And my father, after he did get custody of me, had married my stepmother, and my stepmother, I believe, had her own set of psychological issues as well. She was a obsessive compulsive type of individual, fanatical about being clean. She'd stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning every night, vacuuming the house, sanitizing everything in the house. So this is the kind of things that she did. So this was my early childhood. But getting back to my dad being a Gideon, or coming into that, he would take me to Gideon meetings as a child, because he was very active in the Gideons, very active after his conversion. So I started hearing about Jesus through my dad at about the age of 7. And it was because of that I decided I wanted to commit my life to the Lord at a very young age. I felt impressed. We were in a Gideon meeting in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the appeal went out, does anybody want to give their life to Jesus? And I, in traditional Sunday keeping fashion, they have an altar call. And so I went down and for that altar call and gave my life to the Lord as I understood, as a 7-year-old child could understand at best. And from that point forward, my idea of what Christianity was I wasn't good enough. So I remember I would think that every year on Easter, that was the time that you kind of could wipe the slate clean and start all over again. This is how I thought as a child. And because my stepmother was so perfectionistic and I never could please her, I would always ask for forgiveness for how I'd lived as a child for that year. So this is kind of very dysfunctional kind of upbringing. And this went on, pretty much most of my early childhood. I had friends that were active in sports, and I was kind of the ugly duckling as a kid, sort of like the black swan. I didn't fit in. I buck teeth and just odd looking with glasses, and my stepmother never would dress me in kind of popular clothing. She would buy me tennis shoes or jeans, things that were counterculture to what everybody else was wearing or doing. So I always felt kind of weird and outcast, never really fitting in, always being the one that was picked last, for any teams, if we played kickball, those kinds of things. So this was kind of like, things that were happening to me. So I just never felt like I fit in. I was on a soccer team, but I didn't do that well. And I wanted something that, that I could do that mattered. And when I was in 5th grade at the age of 10, one of my friends that I ran around with, his mother had discovered that she had a talent for running late in life, and she was winning road races and doing quite well. And as kids will do, we would challenge each other. And so my friend, his name was David Garrett, he said, you can't beat my mother in a race. And I said, I can beat your mother in a race. He said, no, you can't. And I said, yes, I can. So what I did is I rode my bike through the neighborhood. I marked out a course, mileage-wise, a 3.5-mile course through my neighborhood, and I began to run. And I would run every day. I'd run that 3.5-mile course, and when I first started, obviously I wasn't in all that great a running shape because I'd never run before like that, but I would time myself, and I would consistently begin to improve my times. And so then I would enter into a small road race here and there, and I discovered I had a talent for running. By the time I was in 6th grade, an older friend of mine, he was 1 grade ahead of me. I was held back in 3rd grade because I had a hard time with reading, with math, and I was kind of developmentally delayed in my education. So I was held back for a year, and I was held back for a year, and so I had to. My son's here; he's rubbing something on the floor. So he's having him a big time. Let's put him in the sandbox. So I was running at this time, and my friend Robert Buckles was trying out for the football team in middle school, and I always wanted to play football because I noticed, once I got in middle school, that all the guys that played football, they were the popular ones, and I had never been popular or picked for anything. But what I became was tough as nails. Like, I had this determination to succeed and win at something, and we'd play backyard football, and even though I was this kind of skinny, scrawny person, nobody could tackle me, nobody could slow me down. I was just literally vicious when you put a football in my hands. And I know for Europeans, football represents what we would call in America soccer, but in America, football is where they wear pads and a helmet, and they just go out there and see if they can hit each other as hard as they can. we did it without pads. I mean, I literally would come back from backyard football games where I would have bruises all over my body, from either running into people or people running into me. But I really wanted to be a football player, but I couldn't do that in 6th grade. And my friend Ben Buckles was trying out for the football team, and he wanted to get in shape. So in America, we have something called the Boys Club, and in the Boys Club, it's like a youth organization where young men can go and hang out, and they had games and things like that there. And so they had a Boys Club track team, and I got invited to join this track team with my friend Robert. And so I'll never forget the day that happened. We were there at the track where I ultimately went to high school, Dobbins Bennett High School. That was the track where we ran at and practiced at. It wasn't very far from my home. And so the gentleman who was the coach of the Boys Club track team, everybody wanted to run sprints. They wanted to run the shorter distances. Nobody wanted to run the longer distances. And so when he asked, is there anybody here that will run the half mile, the mile, and the 2 mile? Well, because I had been running 3.5 miles in the neighborhood, I raised my hand. I can do that. And so I was nominated to be the long distance runner on the Boys Club team. And that was when the door opened for me. And, excuse me, I'm getting a little emotional because I'm kind of going back in time. I haven't thought about this in a while. And that's when the door opened for me that I had an identity and that there was something that I could do that nobody else could beat me at or out-excel me in. And I literally won every single race that I ran on the Boys Club team. And then when I was in 7th grade in middle school, I wasn't quite good enough to beat almost everybody that was in 8th grade, but I was very close. And by the time I was in 8th grade, I was setting records at my middle school that some of them stood for over 15 years after I left. And I was recruited to actually train with the high school team when I was in 8th grade, which was kind of upsetting to some of the high school people that I was running with, especially freshmen and sophomores, because I was beating them. And so then by the time I was a freshman in high school, I was running times that were ranked on a national level. And for the Americans, I had a nationally ranked top 5 2-mile time in the United States. I was in track and field news and ended up competing in 8 state championships while I was in high school. And, man, this is crazy. I'm really having some strong emotional memories from all this. So anyway, I went on to be quite successful as an athlete in track and cross country in high school, and ended up going into college on scholarship to run track and cross country. And so this is who I was. This was everything to me. And my religious experience from that point was that I would ask Jesus to help me to win races. And so when I would win a race, it was because I had been good enough and Jesus would bless me to win. And when I would lose a race, it was because I obviously had done something bad and he didn't bless me to win. And I would always claim verses like, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings of eagles. They shall run and not grow weary. That's how it go. They should walk and not grow weary. They shall run and not be faint. I think I'm grossly paraphrasing that verse, but that's the verse that I would many times claim. And I would always read the Bible from a very legalistic standpoint. I never read the Gospels, which is amazing to me. As a child, I never read the Gospels. I would read Romans. I would read 1st and 2nd Corinthians. These were the things that I would read all throughout the New Testament, reading different passages in the Bible, reading different books of the Bible, and always feeling very condemned and not able to measure up. And so I had a very strict upbringing. My stepmother, like I said, was a perfectionist, and so she was very, very hard on me. And so I just had this feeling I couldn't measure up. My dad was very hard on me as well, and he was a disciplinarian. So if he came home and my stepmother said I'd been bad, then I got a spanking. If I had done something at school and was sent home with a letter that I had misbehaved or done something at school, then I was spanked for that by my dad. I learned very quickly how to avoid mistakes or avoid spankings by falsifying my dad's signature, being deceptive in that regard. I got to a place where my stepmother, because she told me no so much, that I didn't care anymore. I just did what I wanted to do. So by the time I'm in high school, towards the latter part of my high school, I'm sneaking out of the house, doing whatever I want at night. And my parents went through a divorce at this time, my father and my stepmother. And so my stepmother gave me up to my dad. And my dad, who had always been so strict, after he had moved out of our home and was living in an apartment complex that I moved in with him, was not strict anymore. And so the last half of my high school years, I could go out and pretty much stay out all night, do whatever I want. I was a heavy drinker. I was using drugs as well because my dad was a pharmacist, so I had access to those kinds of things. But I was still able to function at a high level. I was still a very strong competitive athlete. And I went into college like this. And so when I got to Virginia Tech, there was absolutely no restraint on me. And college students are good at making fake IDs and doing different things like this. So then I'm going to fraternity parties and I'm going to bars and all these things. Ultimately, I lost my scholarship in college because of my drinking. But, you know, it's still, there was this side of me that wanted to be a Christian, but I had this totally legalistic view of my experience in Christianity, and I'll never forget it. I tried to associate myself with a Christian organization called Young Life, which was the Methodist Christian organization. I knew of that Methodist Christian organization through a girl. I guess I should tell this part of my story too. I hated being at home. I couldn't stand my home life. I did everything I could to avoid it. Running was a real escape for me, so I spent a lot of time running or trying just to hang out with friends, you know, spend the night at their homes, be away as much as possible. But the vacation that I'd always get every summer was I was sent to summer camp in North Carolina. I live in Asheville, North Carolina now, and the boys' camp that I went to from the age of 8 to the age of 18, I went there for 10 years, is located not very far from here. Of course, with my illustrious career as a young person, they don't really like to see me there, even now as an adult. But I don't have any reason to really go back there anyway. But that was my vacation from home, and so I just tell that to say that was my only outlet away from what I felt like was this experience that was so hard there. So college was much like summer camp now, but it was year-round summer camp. I could do what I want. But I did meet a girl there at summer camp. We'd have dances, which doesn't really make sense to me. Why would you do that? But I didn't grow up an Adventist, so I didn't, understand. I don't think my parents understood that that's just not the best. That's like the blind leading the blind. But she was a Methodist, and she was involved in Young Life, and so I just thought, well, when I got into college, that must be a good Christian organization to try to get involved with. And so I was involved with them just for a little bit, and they would come and visit me in my dorm. I remember the two young men who were like kind of the Christian missionaries on Virginia Tech campus, and trying to see if I wanted to be involved in their fellowship and do things with them. And I just made a decision, and it's another experience I'll never forget. I was in my dorm room one night, and I was thinking about the whole thing, and I just told the Lord. It was kind of one of the last times I prayed until the age of I don't know, 4 or 5 years had to pass again before I'd even think about praying. Maybe 7 years. It was quite a while because I was 19 at that time. But I told the Lord, I said, I can't be good, so I'm just going to be bad. And that was my prayer. And at that point, I released myself of all guilt that I might have over anything I did, whether it be drinking or whatever I did. And I literally, for the next 6 to 7 years, I had no conscience about anything I did. I did whatever I wanted. If it felt good, I did it. And I had a lot of anger, so whenever I did drink, I could become a very kind of violent individual. I started having blackouts at that time as well, so there'd be times where there would just be time missing, and I'd be told things that I had done, told things that I had said. Of course, I didn't understand what I understand now, that some of that is possession. They don't call them spirits for no reason. people become imbibed with alcohol, and that opens up the door for demonic activity. So all this kind of stuff is going on, and but every now and then I'd have lucid moments during that time. I was a good student, though. I was very functional as far as my drinking. I could drink, but I still made good grades. And so for the first 3.5 years of my college, I was a business finance major. I did fine academically. Even though I partied, I still maintained my grades. And even though I lost my scholarship in track and cross country, and I guess I should tell about that as well. When that happened to me when I was a sophomore in college, I called my dad up because the only thing my dad was really proud of me for was the fact that I ran. And that was kind of my my identity even with him. And he was proud of me for that. And he would come to all my cross-country meets, all my track meets. My stepmother would never come, but he would come. And so when I told him that I'd lost my scholarship in college, he said to me, well, you've done it. And that was pretty much it. I mean, it was like I knew that I had fallen, in a sense, from grace in my dad's eyes, and that there wasn't really anything that I was doing at that time anymore that he valued. He was doing his own thing by then because he was, completely divorced from my stepmother, and he was dating and courting and doing whatever he did. And so I just had lost my identity at that point in college, and so that just even further exacerbated the partying and the drinking. And so I started looking for an identity again. I was like, I need something to identify with, and because I was a business finance major, many of the people that I went to college with were getting summer internships. And that was just kind of the thing, in the 80s when I was in college, and maybe even still now, you've got to have a summer internship of some kind. So IBM was one of the ones that a lot of my friends would end up getting internships. But I had this real inferiority complex, and I just, I wouldn't even try for things because of some of my, I did well with running, but that was about it. I wasn't that savvy with anything else, and so I didn't feel like I was good enough to work for IBM, but I knew I did need to have some kind of internship. So I had dropped out of college, and with a semester left, because I didn't know what I was going to do when I graduated. I had no idea how I was going to enter the real world. I had no real skills other than just the fact that I'd taken classes. And so I thought, well, I need to get an internship. So I went down to the placement office and opened up this book where they had listings of internships that, business majors could apply for. And I came across this internship for a company called Thomas Nelson Publishers. And Thomas Nelson Publishers is a Bible publishing company in the United States located in Nashville, Tennessee, which is interesting to me because Nashville, Tennessee is in a vision in Spirit of Prophecy. Ellen White had a vision of it being hit with fireballs. And I don't know if you are aware of that vision, but that's one of the new things that's come out. Some people are talking about that. They're making videos about it. In Spirit of Prophecy, she talks about how Nashville will be hit with fireballs. Anyway, kind of a side note, but I saw it says it's open to all majors, and it's open to anyone. And I thought, well, maybe I could qualify for this. So I applied for it, and I got a phone call about a week later from a gentleman named Matt Kahn, who ended up being my team manager, who he ended up recruiting me. And he said, we go out in the summer, we work, we have a great time, and would you like to come to an interview? I said, sure. So I came to the interview, and there was a gentleman running the interview. His name was Glenn Ransom, and Glenn Ransom was a Protestant Christian, and he was a pretty devout Protestant Christian. He really was serious about his belief systems. I don't know, how good of a Christian he might have really been, but he really did push the Bible, and he used a lot of Bible texts to, try to motivate us to be good salespeople. And once again, I was introduced to, spirituality and my need to walk with the Lord. And so, I kind of went into the book business that way, and I don't know what happened to the video here, but I'm hoping y'all can still see me. So I don't understand how this app works. but I was just reintroduced to Christianity again. I really wanted nothing to do with God, especially that first year I sold books in the summer. I saw myself as someone who didn't need God to succeed. Because Glenn Ransom went to a place called Liberty University, which is a university that Jerry Falwell founded. Jerry Falwell was a very big ecumenical leader in the Protestant denomination. He's died, but when he was alive, I believe has been one of the ones that's been very instrumental in uniting Christianity, or a quote unquote apostate Protestantism with the government of America. And of course, I don't know if you know what's happened as of late here in America with Donald Trump, but he just recently passed the Faith-Based Initiative Bill. Honey, it's really hot here. The Faith-Based Initiative Bill, and that initiative bill is one that will basically has opened up the door for the government to support the ecumenical churches. And we know from Spirit of Prophecy that when that begins to happen, we're not very far away from a national Sunday law. And that begins here in the United States, and then will belt itself around the world. The United States is literally clasping hands with the papacy through the ecumenical movement. But anyway, that was where he went to school, Liberty University, Jerry Falwell. And so I was, around a lot of these people that profess to be Christians. And so then my second summer selling books, I decided that so many of these people had done well, financially better than I did in selling books. And I thought, well, maybe there's something to God, if, trying to bring God into the book business. So I kind of went back to my way of thinking when I ran track and cross country in high school. I tried to bring God back into the book business, and I began to seek out the Lord for success in business and sales. And things kind of worked decently that second summer as far as that went. But the problem is that I was still me. I still had my drinking issues. I still had my need to kind of scratch that itch, which was just to be wild and just to kind of go nuts. And I just couldn't help myself. And as much as I thought that I shouldn't do that, I was doing it still. But I'd met a girl who was a professing Christian, and so she was in another part of the United States that summer. She was in Florida, and I was in Oklahoma that summer. So we were separated. And in this book business that I was in, I sold books in the summer door to door. I sold educational books, and I sold Bibles for Nelson Publishers. It was an internship to do that, and it was my introduction to sales. And I should tell this part of the story as well. My first summer, I did discover I had a talent for selling. When I told my stepmother that I was going to go out and do this, she's like, "You'll lose your shirt." So many people don't do well with that. But I was determined that I was going to succeed at that. And so I set about that first summer to do whatever they told me to do, to be diligent, and I was successful. And so going into my second summer, a lot of people were looking at me to do well, and I started out doing well. But I, like I said, was still me. And on the book business, the guys that did the best had the best looking girlfriends, and if you didn't do that well at sales, you lost your girlfriend to somebody else who did do good in sales. And so I had this stress about I had stress about losing my girlfriend because I wasn't doing very well. I was drinking and partying, and I couldn't maintain the kind of schedule that we had to keep. I was working anywhere from 70 to 80 hours a week. We'd start knocking doors at 7 in the morning. We'd knock till 9 o'clock at night. And all this just came crashing down on me. Glenn Ransom, as I had mentioned, this gentleman who was a professing Christian and so promoting religion and sales, had really drilled into our minds that if we were off schedule, then we were not going to succeed. So I was off schedule. So I started going through a lot of mental gymnastics, and I was having a really hard time. At this time I'm 26 years of age, and I'm wrestling with who I am as a person, how I fit into the world. Am I going to keep my girlfriend? I'm lying about my stats, about how I'm doing on the field. Every Sunday we'd have meetings where we'd have to give an account for how we did that summer. that week in sales, and I couldn't bear to go into one of those meetings having people know that I had not, performed and done well because it just wasn't working. I was basically getting up in the morning. We'd have roommates. We'd have people that lived with us, and one of my roommates his name was Bill, and he was from Liberty University. His name, Bill Reese, was his name, and he was doing really well, and he was professing Christian, and so he was talking about his experience with the Lord and how he was succeeding. Well, I wasn't working, so I was, lying to him about stats, and there's just this tremendous amount of guilt over all of it. And so I just started crying out to the Lord. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I was coming or going, and because I had actually I kind of sidestepped a little bit in this story. Before I ended up being with Bill that summer, I had brought some people from Virginia Tech to work with me in the summer, some of my friends that were partiers, and we had partied together. And Glenn Ransom, when he found out about it, he moved me out of the headquarters that I was living in with them. He separated us, and he put me in a headquarters with my actual sales manager, Matt Kahn, and another gentleman named Brent Rust. And both of these guys were doing really well. And we were living in a section in Oklahoma, Ardmore, Oklahoma, I think. Or no, I think it was Ardmore. We were in Ardmore, Oklahoma, and we were in a section that was kind of like dangerous. It would be what we would call in America the projects, and kind of an unsavory place to live. And like I said, I'm not working. All I can do really is there's not much to do when you don't have that much money. You go watch a movie. That's about the most you can do. I was staying around the house, and they would keep the place really cold because in Oklahoma in the summer it's real humidity. It's real humid. It's real hot, much like it is right now here in Asheville, North Carolina. We just got a lot of humidity. It's raining right now, muggy, hot. So you just kind of didn't want to be outside. Just stay inside all day. And they didn't have hot water in the house, so take cold showers. They didn't have a shower curtain, and we just bare bones. Very depressing place to be. And so one night I'm in the place waiting for them to come back, and the sun is going down. And I had these thoughts many times before in my past about committing suicide. Never really feeling brave enough to do it. But I had decided that I was going to kill myself, and so I made a noose out of an electrical cord, and I tied it up in the closet there in the room that I was staying in, and I put my head in it, and I was going to hang myself in the closet, and I was just going to do it because I was losing my girlfriend, nothing was making any sense to me, and so I decided I was going to hang myself, and as I was preparing to hang myself. I hear this voice in my head. This is the first time I ever heard the voice of the Lord, and it wasn't an audible voice. It wasn't like I heard something in the room, but there was a thought that came into my mind that was so clear and so distinct that I knew it didn't generate from me. It was a voice, perhaps my attending angel, my guardian angel speaking to me, but what I heard was, this is exactly what he wants you to do. And when I heard that, I thought to myself, well, that's the devil. The devil wants me to kill myself so that I burn in hell forever. And because that was my theology, that's where I came from. I came out of the Sunday churches, and that's what they teach in Sunday churches, everlasting hellfire, everlasting burning. And so I thought to myself, well, this is the exact thoughts I had. I said, I'll be damned if I'm going to burn forever. There must be something for me to do. There must be a reason I'm supposed to live. And so I decided not to kill myself that night. And then it was from there that I got moved out of that headquarters to live with Bill Reese. And Bill Reese was from Liberty. And so we were going back and forth about spirituality and about being a Christian, because then I became much more interested in spiritual things. I had heard a voice that saved me from killing myself. I didn't tell anybody about what had happened. I didn't share that story with anyone. But this is my worldview. And so now I'm living with Bill Reese, and this is everything I'm telling you is the truth. So this may sound kind of really far-fetched at this point, but this is what happened. So Bill Reese had claimed that he had met a prophet when he was out working selling books, selling Bibles and children's books and educational books. And he'd come back and he talked to me about this prophet that he had met. And so in my mind, I'm like, well, I want to meet a prophet. You know, I want something like that. I need something like that. This is crazy. But so I was crying out to the Lord, and I was crying out to the Lord if he was really real, because I was in such emotional distress over lying about what I was doing, and it might be kind of hard to understand this because you would have to have been involved in my experience and have my worldview from the book business, but they put so much pressure on us to perform, and I wasn't performing, and so I had a lot of guilt. So I was crying out to the Lord, and I was asking if he was real, and I was asking for a sign. I was saying, you know, if you're real, just show me if you're real. Like, make the sky flash, you know, just do something so that I know that you're real. Give me a sign. And I will never forget how that I would, several times during that week before I had this experience, I'd lay in the yard just looking up into the sky in the headquarters that I was living in, just asking God to make the stars move. Just do something so that I know that you're real. And so I had tried to go out and sell books one day. I think I'd bumped into Jehovah's Witness. I think you bump into all kinds of people when you're going out door to door and knocking on doors, and people trying to give you literature, trying to proselytize you, whether it be for multi-level marketing businesses or for their church or whatever. So I'd been given some Jehovah's Witness literature. I'd been given some Mormon literature. My first summer that I sold books, I actually met a Seventh-day Adventist. I didn't know what that was. I'd never met anyone who went to church on Saturday. That was very strange to me. I didn't even know that even existed. But this was my second summer, so the Lord was already, you know, beginning to introduce me to the truth of the Sabbath, but that's a little bit further down the road from what I'm getting ready to share. So I was in a park that was not far from my house because I didn't want them to know. It was a little bit too early to be at the house in case they came home and they saw me there and they realized I hadn't worked that day, because I'm trying to, you know, convince everyone that I'm working. And so I'm sitting there on this bench, and I think I had a piece of literature from the Jehovah's Witnesses, a Watchtower piece of literature in my hand, and I was kind of looking at it and, you know, wondering, well, maybe these guys are right. You know, I don't know. I mean, I came up in the Baptist church. I didn't know. I didn't know what was real. And there were the children playing in the park, and they were probably sitting maybe 20 meters from me, playing on the swings and on the merry-go-round. And there was this elderly gentleman there, and he was watching the kids play, and he looked like, there was a popular TV show that I watched as a child growing up called The Brady Bunch, and maybe you've heard of that show, I don't know, but in The Brady Bunch, you know, that was a 70s show, so they dressed, you know, of course now this is the 90s, you know, we're more into grunge culture, and I was into that kind of music, and so grunge culture in 70s is like, that's night and day in how that looks. So this man was wearing like green polyester pants, a blue polyester shirt. He had on brown patent leather shoes. I mean, he just looked like somebody from the Brady Bunch. He looked really odd to me, and he really stood out. And my initial thought was, look at this dirty old man watching these kids play. What's wrong with him? That's the thought I had. And then in my mind, I hear this voice again, the same voice that I heard in the closet when I tried to commit suicide. And it said to me, he's not a dirty old man. He loves children. And I thought to myself, I was like, yeah, no, actually, yeah. I looked at his countenance, and I could see the peace on his countenance, and I thought to myself, yeah, he's not a dirty man. He's actually a nice person. He just likes watching kids play. And then the next thing that came to my mind, the next distinct thought that came, that I surfaced from nowhere, I can't describe it. I mean, those of you, if you've heard the voice of the Lord, then you know what I'm talking about. This distinct thought comes to my mind, and it says to me, this is one of my prophets, and he's going to come speak to you. And I was like, whoa, what is this? And as soon as I thought it, as soon as it came to me, this man turned and looked at me and smiled and started walking towards me. And literally the hair on my arms was standing up as this man was coming towards me, because I was like, this is like something I can't even imagine. It was surreal. And he sat down beside, because everything got really surreal at that point. Like, just time almost ceased to exist. I can't even really remember very much anymore of what all was happening, just the fact that this man sat down beside me, and he began to share with me his testimony. And he must have talked to me for a good 30 minutes, telling me his story about his life, much like what I'm doing with you right now, starting from his childhood and going forward and telling about his experience. And I can't remember what he told me. I just know that as he was talking to me, I could relate to his story because his story was my story. Like he literally was telling his childhood experience was my childhood experience, and everything. It was the most surreal thing. And then he looked over at me and he said to me, he said, Bill, or he didn't actually say my name. He just said to me, he said, there are a lot of people who think they are going to heaven and they're not going to go to heaven because they can't forgive. If you can't forgive, God cannot forgive you. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I had never heard that in my church upbringing. My dad took me to church. We went to the Southern Baptist Church. I used to sleep in church. I couldn't stay awake. The only reason I like to go to church is because I like to look at the girls at church, the girls that I didn't think that I could have, the girls I didn't think that would ever go out with me, but I would admire them. And, okay, the Brady Bunch was shown in Scandinavia, right? Okay, so you can relate to this story. So that's the only reason I went to church, in my teenage years is why I wanted to go there, was because I wanted to try to talk to girls. And I really didn't want anything to do with the Lord that much. I mean, sort of, but not really. But anyway, I never heard a minister talk about the need to forgive because God could not forgive you if you wouldn't forgive. But it made sense to me because as he said that to me, I thought about all the people that I was mad at. I mean, I shared this just recently with Pioneer Health and Missions that because we're going to be doing a symposium on sin and what the definition of sin is. And, just because someone doesn't commit murder, does that make them a good person? Because I had plotted ways to kill my family, like to kill my dad and to kill my stepmother. I was kind of a dangerous person. My dad at one point took me to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist told him that he has suicidal tendencies and is an egomaniac. You got to watch out for this guy. He could kill somebody. And I really could have killed someone. I think that I would have been a good recruit for the Central Intelligence Agency and would have made a very good assassin because I had a lot of anger in me. And if you had told me that somebody was a bad person and that they needed to die, I probably would not have had a problem doing it at one point in my life. And I actually had a friend of mine that I worked with in college at the Donaldson Brown Center in the restaurant. I was working in a restaurant, and he actually got recruited for the CIA. And the only reason I didn't try to go out for the CIA myself, because he was a very athletic, very strong individual, and at that time I was lifting weights and starting to bodybuild. I'd stopped running because I lost my scholarship. I thought, I'd like to go out for the Central Intelligence Agency, but I had done some stuff, that I had some criminal background, public drunkennesses and things like that I didn't think that the Central Intelligence Agency would accept me. Actually, they probably would have welcomed me with open arms, but it was the Lord's providence that those things had happened in my college days, getting arrested, that otherwise, who knows what I would have become. But anyway, I'm thinking about my dad and how I'd like to kill him. I'm thinking about my stepmother and how I'd like to have killed her. I'm thinking about a roommate that I had that had worked me over financially, how I would have liked to have taken him out, and just a lot of people that I would like to have taken out, in my life that had done me wrong. But there was this conviction that I needed to forgive them and that I wanted to forgive them. And so this man asked me, this is all happening like in instant, just people talk about how, right before they die, their whole life flashes before them. This was happening just like instantly, all these thoughts. And so then he looked at me and he said, if you can forgive, God can forgive you. And I was like, yeah, I want to be forgiven. And he said to me, he said, do you want to be forgiven? And I said, yes, I want to be forgiven. He said, well, then you pray with me. And he stood up in front of me and he said, I'm going to pray this. And if you believe it, you pray it with me. And the prayer went something like this. God, I realize that I need your forgiveness. And I'm willing to forgive those that have harmed me. And I ask you to forgive me. And Jesus, please come into my heart and save me. That was somewhat of what the prayer was like, very similar to that. And then I'm looking up at him, and he's looking down at me, and he says to me, let no man lay hands on you quickly. And then he looks at me, and he goes, fill him, Lord. And he went like this. And I had an experience that I've never had since, but I, like like a rushing mighty wind, I heard this, which I know now is the Spirit of God. It came down, and it hit me in the top of my head, and it went down into my stomach, and it literally raised me up in prayer. And like I was bent over in prayer, and I literally raised up, and I was looking up at the trees, and at this point now it had become twilight or dark. I mean, I don't even, it's like it was daylight when I first saw him, we started talking, and now it's dark, and the street lights are on, and, but everything just took on this luminescence and this, I called it God eyes, because I had them for like 3 days. Everything was like in Technicolor. Everything was crystal clear and really sharp. And I had this overwhelming sense of peace, an overwhelming sense of love and forgiveness. And it was like I felt like I could do anything. I felt like that all my past was okay, and that I didn't have to be angry at anybody anymore, and that I could go out and I could sell books, and the fact that I'd been off schedule and all the mistakes I'd made, all these things didn't matter, and that everything was going to be okay. That was the feeling that I had. And anyway, it's interesting. This man's name was Peter, and so the next several nights after that, he was there in the park. He was like, he had a camper that he had parked there, and he was staying in this camper by the park. A driving camper, like we call them a Winnebago. I don't know if you have them over in Europe. I guess you would have Winnebagos. I think Mercedes-Benz contracts for Winnebago campers, and so of course, he didn't stay in one of those. His was a rundown Winnebago that he was in. But I would go there, and he would be there in the park, and we would talk. And he shared things with me from the Bible. And he shared with me the Sabbath truth. And I don't know if the man was a worldwide Church of God, because I tend to think, because he wasn't correct on the state of the dead, but he did share with me about the Sabbath and the need to keep the fourth commandment and the need to obey all of God's commandments. He talked to me about how that the Lord would one day reward those that were righteous, and that he would, appoint them as leaders in the new heaven and the new earth. These were things that he was telling me, and I was just blown away by this experience, and I had this desire that I would follow him, and I wanted to go with him and be alongside of him. But then one night I came back, and Peter was not there anymore. The Winnebago was gone, and he was gone. And I walked away from that experience that summer knowing that Jesus was real, knowing that there really was something to Christianity, that there was something to the Bible, but yet I still was not victorious ultimately. I stopped drinking for a little bit. I stopped smoking cigarettes and doing some of the things that I was doing there in the very beginning. But one thing that Peter told me was that if you are set free from something and you go back to it, it'll come back to you 7 devils worse. And so then when I did go back to those things, it didn't take me very long, because I didn't have any stability. I didn't have anything solid to connect me to anything. I didn't know how to study the Bible. I just didn't know what to do. And I certainly didn't know where to go to church on the Sabbath. I didn't know how to keep the fourth. I didn't know anybody that did that. I came out of the Sunday keeping churches, so I didn't know anybody of that persuasion. I didn't talk too much about it. I did share the experience with my girlfriend, who was a Sunday keeping professing Christian. She thought I was crazy. She dismissed the experience altogether. So because of that, I just didn't really want to talk about it to anybody. I didn't want to share it with anyone. I think I even shared it with Bill Reese, and he went out there and made fun of the guy, which was really odd, because I thought, surely he met a prophet. He'd recognize this man as a prophet. So I kept all that to myself. But it stayed with me. It stuck with me. And so from that point forward, I knew Jesus was real, but I was still living this life. And so this went on now for another 3 to 4 years. During that time, I was living in Columbia, South Carolina, and I had got myself into a situation with a roommate who ended up using crack cocaine. Crack cocaine at that time was becoming very popular. Now we're moving into the latter 90s, and so this drug is surfacing. It's the next step up from cocaine. Is smoking it, and it was really odd to me that this person would choose to do this, because they came from a very wealthy and elite family. And why would someone choose to destroy themselves this way? And I had got into another business. I had left the book business as far as selling books in the summer, and I got into the college textbook industry, buying and selling college textbooks. And I had a knack for that and was doing well with it financially, but it would require me to travel on the road, and I would leave and sometimes be gone as many as 2 weeks at a time. And I had gone away for a couple of weeks, and I'd come back to where I was living, and this person that I was living with, this roommate, was a female, had been wearing my clothes, had been, like, the whole house was torn upside down. All my clothes, that she had worn them and thrown them on the floor. Wherever she took them off is where they were laying. And all this was just really odd to me. And she wasn't home when I discovered all this, and I went into her bedroom, and I discovered the paraphernalia for someone who's smoking crack cocaine. I didn't know much about that drug. I knew all about drinking, but I didn't know about that. And so I called, a drug hotline, and I said, this is what's going on. And they said to me, how do you know when someone like that is lying? And I was like, how? They said, well, their lips are moving. And so I knew I had to get out of that situation. And, it was the Lord was working with me. Even though all this was going on, he was working with me. And I had this conviction that I needed to somehow get to the Lord. I had to get out of this situation. So I packed all my stuff. And some of the people that I knew from Liberty University, other people I'd sold books with, I went up to Liberty University in Virginia, and I hung out with them. And I was going to church with them at the church that they attended there at Liberty. And after one Sunday service, they had the bookstore open where you could go in and you could buy, Bible books and things like that. And so I went in there, and I'm looking around, and I see the New Testament, the King James, authorized King James Version, New Testament on audio cassette for sale. And I thought, I guess I had some conviction about the Sabbath you shouldn't buy or sell, because the thought came to me, should I buy this? It's Sunday. Should I buy this? And the thought came not like the voice that I'd heard in my mind before, that distinct thought, but I did have this thought, you need this, you should buy this. And so I bought it. And it ended up staying in my car. I had a Lincoln Town Car that my uncle had given me, and I put this stereo system in it. It was like a couch on wheels, and it just, I'd blare this god-awful music that I was listening to. And, but, I had a CD, back then, this kind of, CD player today would cost next to nothing, but back then, a CD player in America was like $200, $300, which was a lot of money in the 90s for a CD player. I invested over $1,000 in this car stereo system back in the 90s, so that was a lot of money back then. And so my CD player went out, and I didn't have enough money to buy a CD player because I needed, the money to do something else. And so, and it didn't have an antenna, my car, so I couldn't pick up radio stations. And I was so used to having noise in the background at all times, music. I was very, very much into music. Music was like a solace to me from my childhood. It was kind of like it was my babysitter. It was my way of escape from, another way of escape from the unhappiness of my home. And so I needed something. And the Bible on audio cassette had been sitting in my car. And so the tape player worked. So I just put the Bible in, starting with the Gospel of Matthew. So I just started from the beginning. I put Matthew in, and I began to listen to the Bible. And I listened to the New Testament. I would be willing to say that I probably listened to the New Testament over the next couple of years at least 10 or 15 times over. And then certain segments of it, maybe as many as 20, 30 times. Just listening to, where there would be Corinthians or Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, all the New Testament. Certain books I would listen to more than others. But I got a good dose of the Bible, and I began to realize that so many things that I'd heard in church were not in the Bible, and so many things that I had never heard in church were in the Bible. And that was how the Lord really laid the foundation ultimately for me to become a Seventh-day Adventist, because and we're now at the age of, I'm almost at the age of 30, so I don't, I'm 49 now, so we've still got another 19 years, so I don't want to go on forever, but this is another significant part of my story and of my experience that you would need to understand to kind of speed up and get to where I am today. So I'm listening to the Bible, and I end up in a situation, I'm now living in Nashville, Tennessee, that really drove me to the Lord, where I was like, my lifestyle, even though I was, trying to be, at this point now, trying to be a Christian, but not really knowing how, listening to the Bible, getting a head full of religion, but not really living for the Lord, that I knew that I needed to live for the Lord somehow, some way. So I didn't know, what to do other than to go back to the Baptist church. I went back to an independent Baptist church. Had become reacquainted with my biological mother. I had not seen her since I had not seen my biological mother since my dad got custody of me at the age of 7. I was now living with her again at the age of 27, not because I had to live with my mother, just because I wanted to know who she was. I'd not seen her for 20 years. And here I'm living with a person who's paranoid schizophrenic, who, and to live with someone like that is not an easy thing to do because stuff just doesn't make sense. Like they're they literally are. They're crazy. I remember one time I came into the trailer that she was living in above my grandparents, and she asked me, said, "Did you throw the trash away a certain way? Were you trying to tell me something?" And I said to her, "Mom, that's crazy." And she said, "I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy." And she really freaked out on me. And I was like, "No, you're right. You're not crazy. You're not crazy." And I just realized you don't call a crazy person crazy. So this is the situation that I'm in. And I'm not knowing what to do with my life. I know that I need something, and from childhood I'd always been interested in the Book of Revelations. I remember when I was probably 9 or 10 years old, I asked my dad if he could teach me about the Book of Revelations, and he didn't know. And I said, "Well, can you find me someone that can teach me about the Book of Revelations?" And anyway, so I had this desire to know prophecy and these kind of things, and listening to the Book of Revelations on audio cassette, not understanding that, not being able to make sense of it. And here I am at the Independent Baptist Church now, and I'll never forget the very first day I walked in there. His name was Dewey, Brother Dewey. He was the pastor of this church, and I got there a little bit late, but he was up there preaching, and he was a very dynamic type of preacher. He'd walk back and forth, and he would rant, kind of like a Billy Sunday. If you ever heard of a gentleman named Billy Sunday, he was a pastor, a Sunday pastor in the Americas back around the time of the early pioneers of Adventism, and he would literally preach so hard that his clothes sometimes would come off of him, which is just insane. But he was a hellfire and brimstone kind of preacher, and this is how this gentleman was, Dewey. But I remember, he was ranting up and down, in front of the church saying, "Don't you want to do something for God? Don't you want to be something for God?" And I was like, "Yes, I want to do something for God. I want to be something for God." It really resonated with me. I'd felt this calling on my life since the age of 7 that I was supposed to do something for the Lord. And so it resonated. And so I started to go to church there. And I attended regularly. I was there every Sunday, whether I partied or not, which I did party. I was out Saturday night, but I was always in church, hungover, no matter what. But I was having this dichotomy with the things I was, reading in the Bible, listening to in the Bible about, how that the unjust shall not inherit the kingdom of heaven. Fornicators, adulterers, drunkards, those kinds of people, they're not going to go to heaven. And I was all those things. And I remember sitting down with the associate pastor one time and saying, "Look, I'm hearing these things in the Bible, and I am doing these things. I'm not going to go to heaven, am I?" He's like, "No, Bill," because they teach once saved, always saved in the Baptist church. And he'd say, "No, Bill, you're going to go to heaven." He's like, you just won't have the kingdom of heaven here. You won't have the benefits of heaven here, but you will one day be in heaven. And I remember walking out of there going, that just doesn't resonate. That just doesn't make sense to me. And so I was crying out to the Lord again, much like I was back in Oklahoma when I met Peter. That experience, was still with me, very fresh in my mind of that experience. And so I believed that if I cried out to the Lord like I did at that time, that he would answer me again. And I remember Romans chapter 11 very distinctly, listening to it from the Bible. And in Romans chapter 11, it talks about the prophet Elijah and how that Elijah, thought that he was the only one left. That, he says, Elijah says, "They've hewn down thine altars, they've slain thine prophets, and I am the only one left." And then Paul says, what was the answer of the Lord to Elijah? "I have reserved unto me 7,000 who have not bowed their knee to the image of Baal. Even so then at this present time there's a remnant according to the election of grace." And so I claimed that promise from Romans 11. I said, there has to be a remnant according to the election of grace. I want to meet them. Who are they? And in my mind, from my experience with Peter, I just thought the Lord's going to send someone to me. They're probably going to look a lot like Moses or Elijah. They're going to be, in camel's hair or something, or I don't know. I don't know what this is going to be. And they're going to whisk me away to the mountains or the wilderness somewhere, and they're going to teach me the way of the Lord. That's the only way I could imagine it. But that was not the plan the Lord had for me. I had gone down to Alabama after praying that prayer, trying to go meet with a evangelist who had come to the Independent Baptist Church that I was attending. I felt like if I went and spent some time with him, I was like the woman who had the issue of blood 12 years. I was looking to men. I was looking to physicians, pastors, for healing, because I even knew something was wrong with what Dewey was preaching, and I should share that testimony as well. Dewey had said that he was going to preach on the book of Revelations, and they were going to do it on a Wednesday night prayer meeting. And he was going to start going through the book of Revelations. And so I went to his first Wednesday night prayer meeting where he was going to talk about the book of Revelations. And he was going through the 7 churches. And there was this thought, this voice again in my head saying, wrong, wrong. Everything this man is saying is wrong, wrong. I kept hearing it over and over again, wrong, wrong. And I thought, I can't even sit in here. I got up and left. And it was a real conundrum for me, because I was like, I really respected this man. I thought that he was a man of God. How could he be wrong? I even talked to some of the different members about my experience. I think he's wrong on this. And they were like, no, he's not. He's the pastor. So then I started I was looking everywhere then. I was like, okay, so if he's wrong, there's got to be somebody that's right. There's got to be a remnant. I'm looking here. I'm looking there. Anyway, so I end up in Alabama, and I'm on this college campus buying books. So here's this is how I came into the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This is how the Lord did it for me. I was on this campus, and I was, at that time, I would make quite a bit of money. So I didn't waste time on a college campus, because time was money. In sales, time is money. And so, I wasn't interested in, anything other than work at that time. I'd never tried to, hit on college girls when I was working on the college campus. I might see pretty girls, but I wouldn't try to talk to them. I just worked. I was buying books. But I was in the biology department at this college in Alabama. I was in it was Montgomery, Alabama. No, it was Montgomery. I can't remember. I think it's Montgomery. I was in Montgomery, Alabama at this college there, and I was in the biology department. And there was this girl, and it was like I kept seeing her, and she kept smiling at me, and it was like she had light on her, and I was looking at her, and so I saw her like 3 different times, and so I just 1 second. Time. Okay, so I saw her like 3 different times, and it was like the woman had light on her. And so I just had this strong unction to introduce myself to her, and so I did. And so we started talking, and then the next thing you know, we were going to have lunch together. And then she's like, would you like to come with me to go pick up my paycheck from where I work? So I rode with her in her car to go get her paycheck, and ended up, hang out with her on the campus until the evening. And then she's like, would you like to come back to my house? And so, I did that as well. But when I went back with her to before we went to get her paycheck, I sitting there in her living room, I asked her, I said, she says, would you like anything to drink? And of course, I was still drinking. I had not stopped drinking. I said, do you have a beer? And she's like, yeah, I've got a beer. So she went and got me a beer out of the fridge, and I'm sitting there drinking a beer on her couch, and I look over on her card table, and there's a brochure, a prophecy brochure. And I don't know if in Norway, when you do evangelistic meetings, if you mail brochures to bring people to the meetings, but in America, that's what we do. We mail out brochures. And so this was a brochure for a Seventh-day Adventist prophecy meeting, and I didn't know what it was. I just know that when I looked at that brochure, it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. I knew it was distinct because I'd been listening to the Bible. I'd been listening to the book of Revelations. I was acquainted with some of the concepts of beasts in Bible prophecy. I knew there was something unique about this. And I said, where did you get this? I said, she said, yeah, amen. I said, where did you get this? And she said, I thought my roommate threw that away. That came in the mail. And so I'm looking at that. I said, are you going to go to this? And she's like, no, I'm not interested in going to that. And I was like, I really think I want to go to this. And so anyway, I ended up spending the night at her house. And I slept on her couch, and the next morning I woke up with this conviction that if I didn't go, because I didn't really have time to go to meetings, I needed to work, and I was only going to be in Alabama for just a couple of days, and I was going to move on to other universities to work. So I called the hotel that they were having the meetings at, and I said, I see you're having these meetings, and I want to know more about them. So what did they do? They connected me to the evangelist. His name is Hiram Rester. They connected me to his room. Now, he had requested that if anybody called in for information, that they just take down name and number and not connect them directly. But they connected me directly to his room, and so he comes on the phone, and I said, hey, I see your brochure here, and I see that you give free literature. I'm wondering if I could get the literature. I'll make a donation to your ministry. At that point, I was convicted about tithing, and I was very liberal with my money giving to the Lord, because that's one thing my dad was. My dad was a very liberal giver to the Lord. He taught me to tithe and always give my money to the Lord. And so I said, I'm more than willing to bless your ministry financially and give into it. So can I get the literature? And he said to me, I never get ahead of my subjects. You'll just need to come to the meetings. And I was like, no. I really can't do that. I said, can I just get literature? He said, I never get ahead of my subjects. You really need to come to the meetings. Because I was asking him about questions about the brochures and what they meant. And he said, you just need to come to the meetings. And I was like, what is wrong with this guy? I can't give him some money, so he'll give me the literature. He just wants me to come to those meetings. And so anyway, I ended up going to the meetings. And when I went to the meetings that night, I listened to this man preach for an hour. And everything that he said resonated with me, because he was line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. He used the Bible to explain the Bible, and I had never, ever in my life seen that happen. That was the first time I'd ever seen a minister use the Bible the way he had used it, and because I knew Scripture, because I'd listened to the Bible, the Lord had prepared my heart by so many times listening to the New Testament, I knew that what he was saying was the truth. Even though he was quoting many times from the Old Testament, everything was harmonizing with what I understood in the New Testament. So it made sense to me. And I thought, I don't know what this is. I don't know who this is. But from this point forward, I am going to be here as much as I can. And so I determined I was going to go to those meetings. And I will never forget it. It was probably the second or third night that I went to the meetings that he made an appeal. And I had been battling with depression over some things going on in my life. And it was the kind of depression where I couldn't get to sleep at night unless I drank myself to sleep, and I might fall asleep at about 2 or 3 in the morning from drinking. But then I'd wake up again at 6 or 7 in the morning, and all my life history would come marching before me. The things I was doing then, the things I had done, all the wicked, evil things that I had done in my life. And there was, as Paul says, chief of sinners. I was one of them. I could relate to being a chief of sinners. And I would cry out to the Lord, I believe you saved me for good works, because I really thought that my salvation had happened when I met Peter in the park. And I was like, but I just can't seem to live for you. What is it? And so he makes this appeal. He says, if you are willing to give the Lord your life, he can do something with you. And if you will stand with me now and give your life to the Lord, he'll do something with you. And so I stood up at that appeal and I said, Lord, if you can do something with my life, I give my life to you. And I went to bed that night. I'd had this depression where I couldn't even sleep through the night. I was trying to take a valerian root just to sleep through the night. And because I didn't want to take psychosomatic drugs. I had some professors tell me, you really need to be on medication. But there was always this thought in my mind, if I would just give my life to the Lord, if I just would do what was right, he would heal my mind, I would be okay. And I went to bed that night, and I slept through the whole night. And I woke up the next morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, which was something that had not happened for probably at least a good year to a year and a half, that I would sleep through a whole night. And you close the door? I would sleep through the whole night, and I woke up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I looked at the clock there in the hotel room, and it's 7 o'clock in the morning. And this thought, again, this voice says to me, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. Why don't you get out of bed? And I was like, yeah, why don't I? And I got out of bed, and the depression was gone. Everything was gone. And I was like, wow, there's really something going on here. Like, I'm really having an experience. And so this evangelist, he's talking about, now how to know if you're called to service for the Lord, and I identified and resonated with that, so I called him, and I said, I really believe I'm called to service with the Lord. And so he said, okay, well, let's get together and talk. And so I went over and I met him at the hotel where their meetings were having, and I met with Hiram. And I remember we walked around the hotel for probably about an hour to an hour and a half, and I told him the story like I'm telling you now about my life experience. And he looked over at me after I got to about the point that I'm at now, and he said to me, Bill, he said, you've been called by the Lord. And he said, you are obligated to keep the Sabbath, because I told him about Peter, and he said, we are Sabbath keepers. He didn't tell me he was a Seventh-day Adventist at that time. He just said, we're Sabbath keepers, and you have found a place where you can keep the Sabbath. And at that point, I knew that I was going to keep the Sabbath. I didn't know many of the other things I was going to learn in those evangelistic meetings, but I knew I'd found a place, at least there, to honor the Lord and keeping the fourth commandment, the seventh-day Sabbath. Went on to understand the state of the dead. That was very shocking to me. That was one of the most shocking things I'd ever learned. But I came to that evangelistic series with a desire to go to evangelism school. I wanted to go to the evangelism school where he went, which is a place called Black Hills Mission College out in South Dakota. At that time, Lou Torres was running the school there with Carol Torres. I don't know if you've ever heard of these names. Anyway, I just came away from that. I knew I was going to go there. When I left those meetings, I was baptized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church at that point, and I went back. I tried to share this with my dad, my father, but he really wanted nothing to do with it. But anyway, he did pay for me to go to evangelism school. I went to evangelism school. When I graduated from evangelism school, I went back to work with Hiram Rester. I worked with him doing 3 evangelistic series as an intern. An evangelistic intern. He would do the meetings in the night. I would do the afternoon meetings that they had. It was his idea of how to train evangelists, young evangelists. So we do afternoon meetings, and we did have people come because there were people that either they might have been third shift workers or they would come on their lunch break, whatever. So I preached 3 evangelistic series there in New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Had success there with baptisms. Went on to do about 14 different evangelistic efforts with Bible working teams, and I was just sold out for the Lord at that point. I was going to be the Lord's man. I was going to be an evangelist. I went to the school where David Ashrick went. Went to the school where Daniel Mesa went, who works for PHM. That's some very interesting history, the circles with that, and I'm going to speed it up now because this is all the details, because what really matters is how I came into the Father-Son message. I had some hard times in the Seventh-day Adventist Church because I realized that even as a Seventh-day Adventist and someone who wanted to be devout and serve the Lord, that within the corporate Seventh-day Adventist Church, there's many that don't want to do that. And so I had a dichotomy with that, and I had some harsh experiences within Seventh-day Adventism that caused me to want to not have anything to do with it. There's been 3 different times in my life where I totally tried to leave the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The first time was after my first wife left me in a divorce. I began to drink again, and when the leadership of the church found out that I was drinking again, I'd been working as a lay pastor in a church in Pennsylvania, and when they found out I was drinking again, no questions asked, they disfellowshipped me. That made me very angry, because I thought, hey, man, I'm going through a divorce. I mean, what do you expect? I mean, I've got some serious problems here. I need some help, and I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to process this. I don't know how to handle this, because I was the byproduct of a divorce, and 2 divorces, actually, and I didn't want that in my life, and I didn't know how to handle it. I remember calling my dad and saying, hey, can you help me out? My dad's a pharmacist. Can you help me out with getting a prescription for some Valium or some Xanax? I think I'm going to freak out. I'm going to lose my mind. Or Klonopin, because I had a neighbor who was using Klonopin, and I'd taken a couple of those, and they made me feel like I could, live with what I was going through. And my dad said, well, you're better off to drink. And so even though I had not drank for 5 years, it was like a license to drink again. And then I started smoking cigarettes, and so I was out of the church again, and I got myself in a situation that landed me. I ended up being incarcerated over it, and that's when the Lord brought me back, and I came out of that incarceration, determined I was going to serve the Lord, and that's an interesting story. I should tell a little bit about that. When I was incarcerated, I was on work release, And I had a gentleman come to me one day. He said, he had a ghost appear to him in the room. He said, do you believe in ghosts? And I said, no, I don't believe in ghosts. I said, the Bible has something very distinct to say about that. Would you like me to share with you what the Bible teaches about that? Because my own opinion really means nothing. And I went into jail not wanting to have anything to do with the Lord. But the Lord used it because he said, yeah, I'd like to know. So I was like, well, I was forced to give a Bible study to him about the state of the dead. And so I said, well, we'll meet back tomorrow night, and I'll give you a Bible study on why what you saw doesn't really line up with what the Bible teaches. And not only did he come, but about 2 or 3 other gentlemen came to that Bible study. And I gave the Bible study, and when it was over, they were like, we want more. So at that point, I began to do an evangelistic series within the jail I was in, and I became known as Bible Bill while I was there. And so when I came out of jail, I was determined to serve the Lord again, and I went back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church in North Carolina because I came back here, and there was some stuff that went on in that church that I became disillusioned with. There was a gentleman who was basically a 22-year-old man who was messing around with 16, 17-year-old girls in the church. They were following him around like a puppy dog, and he was being sexually promiscuous with them, and it came to light that this is what was going on. I shared it with the pastor of the church that this is what he was doing, and they just swept it under the rug. They didn't do anything about it, and I was very disillusioned by that. It's interesting that at that time, 2 gentlemen had come to a Sabbath school while I was attending church there, and they talked about the Father-Son message, but I didn't understand it. They showed me Spirit of Prophecy statements because I actually stood up for them because I saw how the leaders were acting, and they were not acting in accordance as what I understood in the Word of God as how you should behave towards someone that doesn't agree with you. We still have the Spirit of Christ, and we're to treat people as Christ would treat them, even if they don't agree with us. Who did Jesus Christ persecute? I mean, that was my thinking as I saw the way they were treating these men. But the pastor told me that those people caused division and caused problems in the church, and so I shunned the Father-Son message at that time. And I was looking again, I was seeking again, that same thing, going back to there has to be a remnant according to the election of grace, Romans 11. And so I was doing research on YouTube, and I came across some Bible studies on YouTube. I didn't know who they were at the time, but it was Shepherd's Rod. And so I watched the study on Daniel chapter 2, and I was like, whoa, we really haven't talked about the stone of Daniel chapter 2. I don't know if you know anything about Shepherd's Rod theology, but they put a lot of emphasis on the stone that smites the image on the feet, which I believe that's Jesus Christ, cut out of the mountain of his Father, who smites the mixture of churchcraft and statecraft as spoken of as Daniel 2. If you don't understand that, you can find that in the 7a commentary, Spirit of Prophecy. She talks about that the mingling of the iron and clay in the feet of the image of Daniel 2 is the mingling of churchcraft and statecraft. And what churches mingle with the state? The Roman Catholic Church and the Ecumenical Church of the Americas, apostate Protestantism. What are they? They're Trinitarian. So it's the Father-Son message that's going to bring all that to an end. So we are a prophetic people in the fact that we understand who our God is, but there's a whole lot more to it than that. We have a whole volume of 50 years of Seventh-day Adventism that many of us know nothing about, and by God's grace, I'm endeavoring to teach about those things. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit sidetracked here, but I'd heard all these things, but I ended up following after Shepherd's Rod theology. I ended up moving to Virginia, and was really convinced that Shepherd's Rod was the truth. And because of my past experience as a speaker, as an evangelist, they wanted to recruit me. They wanted to send me out to Waco. They wanted to train me to be an evangelist in Shepherd's Rod. And I was pretty much determined that was what I was going to do. And so I went to a church in Roanoke. It was a Reformed Seventh-day Adventist church because the people that I was living with who were Shepherd's Rod, I packed up everything I had in Asheville, and I moved to Virginia, not even knowing where I was going to go, what I was going to do. And for sake of time, I'm going to get in. There's so much of my history about how I got involved in music and writing songs as a musician, and potentially even having a professional music career as a country music singer, a country music artist. I laid all that on the line for the Lord because I felt convicted that I shouldn't go that route, that I should try to serve the Lord. And so I'm up there in Virginia, I'm going to go to this church that my friends went to, and I'm going to try to help them. And so to understand Shepherd's Rod theology, because, Shepherd's Rod shows up in a Seventh-day Adventist church, they run them out as soon as they find out who they are and what they're teaching. And they are teaching error, but they don't believe that. We believe that at that time I believed I was telling the truth. I mean, I believe I had the light of the third angel. I was the fourth angel. This is Shepherd's Rod. Anyway, if you know anything about this theology, this is what they teach. And the writings of Victor Houteff are, in addition to Spirit of Prophecy, and something that we need to understand, they're what correct Ellen White's errors and mistakes. It's a crazy theology, but I got involved in that. So I'm at this Reformed Seventh-day Adventist church, and the Lord once again uses a man to help me, to make me think about some things, and I began to go, wait, maybe there's some problems with Shepherd's Rod theology. Maybe it's not 100% correct, and that's when I became convinced that the Spirit of Prophecy, the writings of Ellen Harmon White, are not about her. They're about Jesus speaking through her. She was the vessel that was used by the Lord to speak the words of Jesus by his Spirit. There were others that could have been used by him, but they didn't want to be used by him. And she was a vessel that was willing to be used. So I began then from that experience with Shepherd's Rod to look at the Spirit of Prophecy in a completely different way. And I'm grateful for it because I know the Lord used it to bring me out of that as well as to show me where I'm at today. And so this won't go on too much longer. I'm about done with this testimony because we can fast forward to now pretty quickly from here. But anyway, I came out of Shepherd's Rod. I fasted for 21 days to come out of that error. And I can tell you that a seducing spirit is a very powerful thing to become involved in. If you become involved in deception of that level, and I don't know really of too many people that ever escaped from Shepherd's Rod, because any of the people that I knew when I left it, they're still in it. But I did fast for 21 days to come out of it. I didn't initially start that way. I was just going to do a 10-day cleanse, a 10-day juice fast, and the Lord led me on to a 21-day fast on juice, and it was at the end of that fast that I knew that Shepherd's Rod was wrong. I didn't know exactly how to prove it wrong, but I knew in my heart of hearts it was wrong. And I ended up breaking my elbow on the property there, and so because I wasn't going along with Shepherd's Rod theology anymore, they didn't really want me there anymore. And because I broke my elbow on their property, they were scared maybe I would sue them or whatever. They wanted me off their property. And so I ended up going down to Florida to live with my brother, my stepbrother. And so I'm down there in Florida, and I try to go back to the corporate Seventh-day Adventist church, but I'm realizing I just don't fit in the corporate Seventh-day Adventist church. I'm just, once again, seeing things there. I went to what's called the Coastal Seventh-day Adventist Church in Jacksonville, Florida, and the pastor would get up there and he would say, we are Spirit-led and Holy Ghost. He said, we were Bible-led and Holy Ghost-fed. And I'm like, how are they Bible-led and Holy Ghost-fed? Because I'm seeing things in this church that just do not line up with what I know it means to be a Seventh-day Adventist. And in Shepherd's Rod, I learned about health reform. I learned about dress reform from Shepherd's Rod. So I just wasn't seeing those things in that church. So I was really not, too in tune with them. I didn't believe they were really being led by the Holy Spirit. So I just said that I can't go back to the corporate church. I don't know where to go. I know Shepherd's Rod is a lie. And so I had another crying out to the Lord. And I'll never forget it. I was walking on the beach one morning there in Jacksonville, Florida, and I just prayed. I was with my dog at the time who actually died this summer, but she was with me. We were walking on the beach, and I said to the Lord, I felt like walking into the ocean and drowning because I felt so disconnected. I knew that what I had known from Seventh-day Adventism was the truth. What little I did know and understand, but I didn't know where to go again, and so I prayed. I said, Lord, I can't go back to the Seventh-day Adventist church. I don't feel comfortable there. I've never really felt comfortable there. I know I can't go back to Shepherd's Rod because that's a lie. You've got to have a people that believe the truth. Just like you've led me in the past and shown me who they are, show me again. It was a week later on Sabbath that I got an email. It was a forward from a gentleman who I was in Shepherd's Rod with. He had been to Talking Rock, and he had heard Nader Mansour speak on the Father-Son message. And he forwarded that message that Nader Mansour did at Talking Rock to me. This gentleman had forwarded many things to me since I'd left Shepherd's Rod. And all of them really about trying to bring me back into Shepherd's Rod. And I wanted nothing to do with that, so I would not open his emails. But this email in particular, I felt impressed that I should open it. So I opened it, and I watched that sermon by Nader Mansour. And when I came to the end of that sermon, I had my answer as to why there was a problem in the corporate Seventh-day Adventist church. It was because they don't know who their God is. And I knew at that point then who the Father was, and I knew who Jesus was. I accepted it completely after that message was over because I knew that what that man had shared was the truth. And I was amazed. And so from that point forward, every morning I would go and take a walk on the beach, and I would walk as long as it would take me to listen to one of those sermons. And I probably listened to every single one of Nader Mansour's sermons during that summer. And so I once again had this impression, I've got to meet this guy, and like he's like a prophet. I mean, who is this? In my mind, I'm thinking, who is this Arab who's living in Australia, that's preaching this truth? Where did this come from? Who is this guy? And, I know it was the Spirit of the Lord moving upon me to just say, well, maybe he might be in the United States. And so I looked up on his website to see if he was going to be in Revelation 14:12. I don't know why I didn't think to do it sooner, but I did. And sure enough, he was going to be in Roan Mountain in September, Roan Mountain, Tennessee, which is not too far from where I grew up. I grew up in Kingsport, Tennessee, not too far from where I'm living now. And so I was like, whoa, Roan Mountain, Tennessee, what kind of providence is this? I got to go to this. And so I called up the campground where they were going to have the Roan Mountain campground is where he was going to be. I called him up and I said, I thought for sure, with what this guy's preaching, the whole place is going to be jam-packed full. There's going to be people from everywhere there for this. And so I called him up and I was like, I want to make a reservation in the campground if you have one. He's like, oh, yeah, we got all kinds of room here. I'm like, what do you mean? You're having these meetings. You're not full? And I'm like, no, we're not full. You can have any campsite you want. And I'm like, this is amazing. I can't believe they're not full. I was like, well, maybe I'm going to be the only one there, but I'm going. And so, this is probably about maybe 2 months out from when he's going to be there. And because that was, I guess it was probably late July when I discovered this. So he was going to be there in September. So this anticipation of going to this was, building upon me. And then 2 weeks before I was going to go to the Roan Mountain Camp meeting, I get the genius idea that maybe there's somebody that's directing these meetings. Maybe I could call him. There's a point of contact. So I look again on the website, and sure enough, there's a phone number there. It's Mac's. I don't know if you ever know who Mac is, but it was Mac's phone number. So I call, and I talk to Mac, and I kind of tell him a little bit of my story. He's like, Bill, welcome home. You found home. So I go and I fellowship with Mac, and I begin to meet people from the Father-Son message. I meet Linford Beachy. I meet, Nader Mansour. I meet David Clayton. I meet, a lot of these different personalities in the Father-Son movement. I had determined I was actually going to go to work with Linford Beachy, but that didn't work out. Then from there, I met Adrian Evans. When I went to Talking Rock, I actually worked with Adrian Evans in Europe in 2014. I went there and did music ministry with him. The Lord actually has gifted me in music. I could have had a professional music career, as a singer-songwriter, which that's a whole other side of my testimony, but that for sake of time, I don't have to get in. I gave that up for the Lord. I only play for the Lord now. I don't play for myself. I don't play that music publicly for anyone. It's something that I did, but it's not something that I do now. But anyway, I met all these people, and I was sold out for the Father-Son message, and determined to work for the Lord, and that's what happened for me 5 years ago. In the meantime of that, I've also, come to understand the prophetic side of our message. I met a gentleman named Don Frost, and through meeting Don Frost, I came to understand that we have a whole side of who we are as a prophetic people. I endeavor to teach from our prophetic charts. This chart right here is modeled after an 1863 chart. This was put together by a gentleman named Little John, who was a pioneer. And so this chart probably dates from, I'd say, about the 1880s to 1890s. As far as I know, I'm the only one that actually probably has one of these. This was given to me by a lady who came to one of my first evangelistic series when I worked with Bible teams, who was doing evangelism in Virginia. And she said, this has been in my family for generations. They taught from this. And she gave it to me. It didn't mean anything to me because I didn't understand what these things, especially over here when we deal with Islam and Bible prophecy, the first and second and third woe, which are the last three trumpets of Revelation chapter 9, 10, 11, and 12. I didn't understand. This sat in a box for years, but when I began to understand the prophetic side of our message, I knew that I had something significant in having this chart. And so what I've come to discover in all of this is that the first 50 years of Adventism are who we are as a people. She makes a statement, and I'll read that statement to you, actually. Where is my... Let's see. Let me find something here. Honey, do you know where my... Oh, it's right here. I want to read this to you as we begin to close here. I preached a sermon on the daily this past Sabbath that will be being posted to PHM. So hopefully this week, but I've got to... Let me find this quote in my sermon outline here. Where is it? One second. I want to read this to you because I believe if you haven't heard this quote, you need to hear it. Here it is. It says, many of our people do not realize how firmly the foundation of our faith has been laid. My husband, Elder Joseph Bates, Father Pierce, Elder Edson, and others were among those who, after the passing of time in 1844, searched for the truth as for hidden treasure. I met with them, and we studied and prayed earnestly. Often we remained together until late at night, and sometimes through the entire night, praying for light and studying the Word. When they came to the point in their study where they said, "We can do nothing more," the Spirit of the Lord would come upon me. I would be taken off in vision, and a clear explanation of the passages we had been studying would be given me, with instruction as to how we were to labor and teach effectively. Thus light was given that helped us to understand the Scriptures in regard to Christ, His mission, and His priesthood. A line of truth extending from that time to the time when we shall enter the city of God was made plain to me, and I gave to others the instruction the Lord had given me. Light seemed to shine all through the house, and an angel's hand was laid on my head. From that time to this, I have been able to understand the Word of God. There is a line of truth, brothers and sisters. Those of you that are listening to me now and those of you that will watch me, there is a line of truth that has been laid down in the Seventh-day Adventist movement. It's the first 50 years of our message. It is the Philadelphian message, and it is the message we must all return to. And it's more than just the Father-Son message, brothers and sisters. There's a whole lot more to it than just that. There's our whole prophetic side of things as well that most people do not understand. And the Lord brought me into that understanding as well. And so then I began to feel like I was an outcast within this movement, because within the Father side of things, I realized that so many of the leaders do not understand our prophetic side. And on the prophetic side of things, our prophetic truth, our understanding there, those people have embraced the Trinity and reject the Father-Son message. And I became firmly convicted in my mind that there would be a people, and there will be a people, that understand both sides of the equation. They understand the Father-Son message, and they understand who we are as a prophetic people and what we taught on those charts, i.e. the 1840 chart and the 1853 chart, and ultimately this 1863 chart that I just showed you that Uriah Smith and James Wright were responsible for putting together. Anyway, this is who we are as a people. And at this time now, I've been recruited to be an evangelist minister for Pioneer Health and Missions. Jason Ash, who is the one who, many people know Daniel Mesa, but the reality of it is Jason Ash is the one who founded Pioneer Health and Missions after his mother was tragically killed in a car accident. He had been collecting Pioneer books, and when his mother passed away, those people that were at the funeral were able to come together, put the finances together to hire Daniel Mesa. And Daniel Mesa went forward as an evangelist for Pioneer Health and Missions, and that's why kind of put them on the map, because many people know who he is from the corporate Seventh-day Adventist Church. I know Daniel Mesa. I go all the way back. I know Daniel Mesa from 17 years ago. It doesn't get any better than this. You couldn't write a fictitious book with how things have aligned, but this is how God works. The wheels within a wheel. Anyway, the Lord has now landed me where I believe I'm supposed to be, and I'm very grateful for that. And so how I got here today was through a testimony that I guess Eva watched through Pioneer Health and Missions, and me giving my testimony with Daniel Mesa. Some of the things in that testimony would fill in some of the blanks that I didn't cover in this testimony. I went into more detail, into my past than I could have ever gone into in that testimony. But I'm grateful to how the Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, has preserved me in this time, how he's never let go of me. He is faithful. He has seen me through so many things these last 5 years. I've gone through some experiences, some trials that I thought would break me, and all they've done is make me, and that's what he does. He's given me a beautiful son. This is my son, William. This is my son, William. Give me a beautiful son. He's given me a beautiful wife who I met in Romania. He's blessed me exceedingly abundantly above all I can ask or think, and he's given me a mission field to work in. And I'm so grateful that I've been able to speak to you all today, and I just pray for a blessing over you all in Norway. I know that this message is belting the world, and he's going to continue to add to it. He's looking for swift messengers, and swift messengers have a message to give. And so I pray that whoever hears this, you're being called to that as well. And anyway, I'm going to close in prayer now, and then I don't know how this ends. I've never been on your call before, but anyway, I thank you for the opportunity to share with you, and just we'll close in prayer. Father, again, I come to you in the name of your Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, and I just thank you so much for this time that I could spend with my brethren, my brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. And even though that we are all over the world, we're scattered like sheep, you know where each and every one of us are. We've been scattered by false shepherds, by those that have not taught the truth, by those that have been given a charge to tell the truth, and they're not telling the truth. But you promise that you have precious jewels. You have those that you are instructing for this time, that you're raising them up. And I pray that this testimony that I've given today would be an inspiration to those, that they would realize they're being called to be those precious jewels, to be those swift messengers, to give a message to the world at this time. Time is short. You're preparing to come again soon. There's so many things that are happening in the world that suggest this to us. The things that are going on over there in the Middle East with Islam, which is identified in Bible prophecy. The pioneers understood this. The volcanic activity that we're seeing in Hawaii that's beginning to awaken all over the Pacific Rim, the Ring of Fire being activated in Spiritual Gifts Volume 3. After the flood, you talk about these things through your prophet. You're preparing to come soon. So I just ask that you just bless my brothers and sisters with your spirit, that you continue to lead and guide us into all truth. And I thank you for your mercy and grace to us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.